Hello, and welcome to Ending Physician Overwhelm. I'm your host, Dr. Megan Mello. I'm a family and obesity medicine physician, as well as a certified life coach for physicians. In this podcast, we talk about how the learned habits of people-pleasing, perfectionism, and a lack of boundaries show up in our lives and how they contribute to burnout, exhaustion, and overwhelm. The healthcare system is broken, my friends, but let's not wait for it to be fixed in order to feel better. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode. Let me ask you a question. What is the dialogue, the internal narrative that goes on in your head, especially when you're in the middle of a difficult day? I'm a mess. I'm behind. This is terrible and it never gets any better. I should be smarter. I should be more efficient. I suck. We all have an internal narrative, whether or not we like to admit it or talk about it, right? We all do. And so many of us are walking around with this negativity that is just been stewing in our brains. Now, we're going to talk about how you're not unique in this regard and why our brains do this. But today we're going to really be digging into this soundtrack that goes on in our mind, again, especially when things are challenging, we're in the middle of a tough day, we're trying to accomplish something new, and how this negative dialogue or soundtrack is really getting in the way. So I'm going to give some background, which is that I'm rereading the book Soundtracks by Jon Acuff. I've read it before, and I read it in book format, but today I am listening to it again in an audiobook. And of course, we get different elements out of it. And it's been about 2 years since I read it. And so coming back to it gives me different perspective. But someone had recommended that I read it when I was expressing a challenge to myself of I have a hard time really accepting affirmations, really trying to rewire my brain. And so, again, a friend had suggested, why don't you try rereading Soundtracks, because it's going to give you some new ideas. And, I'm halfway through it, and I really wanted to come and bring this to you because I think there's some really helpful ideas here. So let's talk more about the negative soundtracks that go on in our brain. So the human brain is, of course, wired to have negativity. And that negativity is generally designed to keep us safe, right? If we didn't have some kind of a drive to get up and eat, to take care of others, to do things that are hard, like hunting a lion so that we have food. If we didn't have some kind of drive to do that, if we didn't have a very quick fear sensor that goes off, we would be prone to starvation. We would be at risk of predators killing us, right? There are all sorts of mechanisms why we have this wiring that is biased towards negativity. And like so many things, this is deep mammalian wiring that maybe isn't so helpful in today's modern age when most of us are not trying to escape from predators. And most of us are not going to starve if we don't go out and go hunting, right? There are some differences here, but just to say that if you find yourself with a really negative soundtrack, part of that is innate to human beings and designed to keep us alive and safe. But part of it too is also highly socialized into us. High achieving professionals have long been driven by a narrative of you need to get better, you suck at this, you'll never learn. And this internalization of this disciplinarian. This has felt perhaps necessary and helpful for you because as a high achiever, you had to work hard to get here. And you know that you probably had tough professors, teachers, perhaps parents, coaches, right? People who were yelling at you, and sometimes flat out yelling at you to work harder, do better, be better. But how many of us internalize that voice? One of my clients, who's a head and neck surgeon, describes this voice as the old white man in my head who's telling me what to do, right? This negativity is rife within us. And I think, especially as high achievers who have really internalized that voice. Now, do you need to be a professional to have this voice? No, of course not. You might have grown up with an authoritarian parent in your life, or again, a coach, like a sports coach or a teacher who, unfortunately wired your brain to be incredibly hard on yourself and to not believe in yourself. There is so much of this, and you can think about how much human suffering has to do with this internal dialogue of negativity that beats us down. It has felt necessary, my friends. It has felt necessary in order to drive you to do the hard things that you need to do. But unfortunately, we carry that negativity with us and we use it against ourselves over and over and over again, not because we're sadistic, but just because we have some kind of belief that that negativity is necessary, or that it's helpful in some ways, or we just have no idea how to make it stop. But think about it. When you are beating yourself up, when you are stewing in this train of thoughts that comes to you, I suck, I'm no good at this is too hard, I'm lazy, I'm behind, right? When we are steeped in those thoughts over and over again, especially doing the hard work that we do, what happens? What does it create for us? It creates this emotional swamp of negativity, right? It adds to anxiety, overwhelm, frustration, this sense that nothing is any good. When you think about the role of soundtracks in movies or TV shows, if you are able to watch them with and without the music, even if it's not lyrical music that has words to it, but simply the background music that goes along with these shows, you will see that without the music there, the emotional tone is different. And so when we are listening to the scary noise in our head, right, these negative thoughts over and over again, that necessarily affects the way that we feel. And when we are feeling a certain way, right, when we're steeped in negative emotions, it makes it harder to take actions that are actually helpful. It makes it easier to repeat actions that we don't want to be doing, like scrolling our phones, getting distracted, procrastinating, overeating, right? Any of those things. And it often leads to a lot of rumination, and including letting these thoughts spin out of control over and over again in our minds. Ask me how I know. So many of my clients will say, I think you're in my head, right? It's because I have this same, we all have this same tendency. And left unchecked, it just runs wild. So let's talk about what we can start to do in order to change the soundtrack. So in the book Soundtracks, Jon Acuff talks about a lens to look at the thoughts in your head and the questions that you can sort of filter these thoughts through. So when you catch yourself thinking these thoughts, or you might sit down and think, oh, I had a really hard day today. Like, what were the thoughts that came up in the middle of that day when it was so hard, right? And you just write them down. So the filter that you can start to take those thoughts through is it true? And is it true is a great question to start with, because we're trying to ascertain, like, is there any proof of what I am saying? So if I, a physician who has a coaching business, who is a working parent, if I am telling myself I'm lazy, and I step back and I think about all of the things that I have accomplished in my life, all of the things that I produce, is there any evidence that I'm lazy? No. If we're sitting here thinking, I'm so ineffective, right? I'm so inefficient, right? And then you step back and you look and you say, well, I saw 25 patients today and I answered 60 things in my inbox, right? Am I ineffective? Am I inefficient? Have I done nothing? No, I've done a tremendous amount of stuff. Now, we could sit and argue about how much of that stuff should have been yours to do. That's a different discussion. We've had that discussion. We can go back to that discussion. But just to say that so many of these thoughts are not provable, and they're not provable in a way that we should choose to think, right? We don't have to stand up in a court of law and argue, are they true or are they not true? We just have to say, yeah, there's no evidence that I'm lazy. There's no evidence that I'm ineffective or inefficient. Another question to ask yourself to filter these thoughts, is it helpful? When I have the thought, I'm lazy, I'm behind, I'm inefficient, is that helpful? Again, this is where we often have a bias that we think, well, yeah, no, it is helpful for me to have that thought because then it drives me to work hard. But we have so much science that shows us that negative reinforcement, this idea, if I shame somebody that they'll do the opposite thing that I really want them to do, does not work. It may have a very short-term impact, right? If we call ourselves lazy, we might quickly in the moment sort of get up and do something different, but probably it's not going to last very long. It's certainly not going to be something that motivates us to be quote unquote unlazy and productive. That negative self-talk gets in the way. So when you find yourself thinking one of these thoughts, is that helpful? Is that helpful? Right? I think that most of us probably wouldn't go and accuse our friends of being lazy. We might have a discussion with them. I hope that we would have a discussion with them and we might be able to talk about it, but we probably wouldn't just flat out accuse them of being lazy. The next question to filter through, is it kind? And again, this is an area where so many physicians and other high achievers struggle, right? Is it kind? You could be like, why is that important? When has kindness ever mattered? But I want to ask you, when people have been unkind to you, how does that feel and what does that actually produce? Has someone else's unkindness really produced something good or helpful for you? I can't think of a time. Now, I'm not saying that I haven't learned things, that I haven't grown through someone else being unkind to me, but it wasn't because they were unkind. It was because it changed the way that I thought about something and I chose to intentionally do something different. It wasn't a direct product of their unkindness. We are often so used to being treated unkindly and especially to being unkind to yourself. But think about what happens when someone is kind. When a patient expresses sincere appreciation for something that you've done, when people in your office do something that genuinely helps you out of kindness, what does that produce in you? That produces positive emotions. It produces the actions that follow when we're feeling good, when we are feeling good, when we are feeling loved, when we feel the gratitude coming towards us, right? That produces good actions. When we feel good, we do good things. It's easier to stay on path with things that will get us towards our goals, whatever those goals are, right? So when you find yourself sitting in this stew of negative thoughts, when you recognize that they're there, you can stop and ask, is that true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? If it doesn't meet all three of those, right? If it's not helpful and not kind and not true, we're going to learn how to let that go because that thought is not helpful. Let's talk about another truth when it comes to these negative thoughts. So when I'm working with someone and we are working through whatever issues they're bringing into coaching, and me, myself, I have sought this. When we have this awareness of the negative thoughts, so the thoughts are happening, but we are stopping to notice them. When we are taking the time to do journaling, thought dumps, right? Like just kind of clearing these thoughts out of our head and onto paper. This awareness, right, creates this knowing of, gosh, I am just riddled with negative thoughts. And for a little while, that feels very hard. What's wrong with me? Why do I have all these negative thoughts? Now, again, our human brain is wired towards this. So there's nothing wrong with you. But when we have awareness of how many negative thoughts we have this very strong desire to just turn it off. Like, what's the magic secret that turns these things off? How do I just never have these kinds of thoughts again? I love this part because he shares that someone had shared with him, and I didn't write down the name of the person. You can go read the book if you want more details. But this person said, yeah, the negative thoughts, it's not a switch that we flip on and off. It's a dial. It's a dial that we can adjust the volume. So I can adjust the volume and I can turn down the negative thoughts. Now, stressors and certain people and certain situations, are going to crank the volume back up and put you back in a place of negativity. I talked about how having had my incident with an IUD perforation that happened to me personally and needing to have surgery sort of took me back into this victim mode, right? It's like the volume had crept up, like somebody bumped the dial, right? And that negativity and that victim mentality came just like rushing back, and I noticed it, right? Somebody cranked up that volume. But similarly, we have the ability to turn down the volume on the negativity. We've talked about some strategies for this already. One thing that I love is naming that voice, right? The voice that tells you that you're lazy, that you're behind, that you're inefficient, that you should be smarter or better or nicer in some way. What do we want to call that voice? As I shared, one of my clients calls it the old man in my head that yells at me, right? Um, you could label this negative Nancy or Karen. It's a Karen voice. My apologies to anyone out there who's named Nancy or Karen. But we want to pick some kind of name of like, oh, yeah, there she is. There's that voice. Oh, yeah, okay. And you can imagine her. You can characterize her or him or non-gender person, right? You can characterize them however you want. You could think of Roz in Monsters Inc., right? The giant sort of I don't know, kind of sluggish, kind of creature is like, or Debbie Downer from SNL. You could imagine your internal negative bias with some kind of characterization like that, so that when you notice the voice, you can be like, oh, yep, there's Debbie Downer again. Okay, interesting. What do I want to choose to do differently here? When we create this awareness, right, it helps us to be able to turn down the volume on that negativity. Now, Jon also shares a list of 50 things that you can do in order to turn down the volume. And what it comes down to is just changing your attention a little bit, right? So the negative voices comes in and you might just take a notice and say, oh, okay, what do I need to do right now? Just acknowledging that the voices are there. And shared some things such as like going for a run, which obviously you're not going to do in the middle of your clinic day, right? But you might turn to the handshaking tactic that we talked about. You might choose to look at a funny cat video. There's a number of things. You could just take deep breaths, right? You could, hopefully with nobody around you, you could stomp your feet a little bit, or you could sit and feel your feet underneath you, that grounding sensation where you really feel, what do my feet feel like inside my shoes? What do the bottoms of my feet feel like? What can I feel on top of my feet? And really tuning into that sensation. All of these types of tools are trying to bring us back into the present and get us out of that negative bias, right? So that is a way that we can turn down the volume on these negative thoughts that are running on the soundtrack. The final thing that I want to share with you as thoughts to think about here is that you're going to have negative thoughts, just like you're going to have other thoughts. You're going to have thoughts that come in all day. I've seen so many different estimates of how many thoughts human beings have. The one I've used the most is something like 40 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Many of them are unconscious. They're things that we're not aware of. But some of them, obviously, we're painfully conscious of. Let's just say we have lots and lots and lots of thoughts, right? And we might notice, God, a lot of these thoughts are really negative. They're dark. I don't like feeling this way. It doesn't feel good to do the challenging work that I do at work or at home or whatever we've got going on, and to have this constant negative dialogue in my head. I don't like that. I want to change that. So often we might jump to thinking, oh, if I just get out of this place, if I just change this job, if I just leave medicine, that is going to change this negative thought pattern. And it does not do that automatically. We have to work on it. So we can filter through is that true? Is it helpful? Is it kind? Right? Where we're kind of eroding the supposed truth of the thoughts in our head. That's one method. We can turn down the volume, right? And choose to see that negativity as coming from, kind of a character who lives inside of our head. And we can choose to pay less and less attention to that character, even though we can't fully disentangle them, right? We can't find the off switch. Another thing, though, is starting to program thoughts that we would rather think into our brain. And the way that he describes this is that you're going to have thoughts anyway. Why don't you choose them? Why don't you choose what you get to listen to? And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, right? You can think about a practice where you have affirmations, or you say mantras, or maybe you meditate on a word or a sentence. When we do thought work, we are often looking at what is the default in response to whatever thing I'm talking about, and what would I rather think? What would I rather think in response to seeing a double book on my schedule? Would I like to continue to think somebody's trying to ruin my day by making me overly busy? Or would I like to choose to think something else, right? And we can pick that something else. We might say, oh, I don't know, I'm coming up with a blank because I hate double books, my friends. I hate them. But somebody who is, I don't know, we could choose to think, well, that's going to change my day, right? That's a much more neutral thought than someone is trying to ruin my day. We might think, oh, somebody really needs that spot. We might be excited, right? If you are paid on productivity and you know that there's going to be a direct impact on the amount of money you bring up. Now, that's a really poor motivator for most of us, but somebody's going to have that thought, right? You might look and you see, oh, I know that she was trying to get in. I'm so glad somebody found a spot for her. There are a number of things, and maybe that's a tough example to start with, but we can choose intentionally different times where we might practice thinking new thoughts, right? So that is a specific example of doing really active thought work on something that might happen to us, but we can also spend some time saying things out loud to ourselves, journaling on certain things. Hypnosis is a much deeper sort of level, or neuro-linguistic programming, right? Where we are really trying to weave new thoughts into our subconscious. One thing that I've challenged my group to do is to start saying affirmations out loud to themselves. Now, affirmations, I just mean some kind of sentence that feels helpful, empowering, that is something we want to practice thinking. It doesn't need to be Pollyanna-ish. It doesn't need to be pie in the sky. Everything is great. We don't need to go there, right? But there are certain things that you might choose to think on purpose and that you might practice thinking and saying out loud or journaling on that help to rewrite the negative programming that's in your head, right? When we are working on dialing down the negative thoughts, we want to actively replace them with something helpful. You might read something helpful. You might Google search or chat GPT, what are 10 affirmations that I can choose to start practicing and just get into the habit of saying them out loud. You might choose a response that you're going to say directly in response to seeing a situation like a double book. You might choose to start saying, oh, well, you don't have to take it any further than that if that feels helpful, right? Because if I have the response of, I don't know, expletive, insert your favorite expletive here, oh, crap, some degree worse of that when you see a double book and you choose to actively replace that with saying, oh, well, right? You have turned down the volume and you are practicing rewiring your brain to have less of that negativity. When we do this work, we're not going to gaslight ourselves into believing that we should just be happy about every circumstance. But I will tell you, we will find that we have more mental flexibility. We have more emotional resilience. We have more intention and boundaries, and we are better able to advocate for ourselves, right? If I don't sit in the negative emotional storm of being just really pissed off about a double book, if I just say, oh, well, I might choose to do something different and I might choose to take some kind of action, right? Let's imagine a day, right, where you have to leave work on time. You've got something that's scheduled completely out of patient care hours, and someone has added an inappropriate double book to your schedule, right? If I'm not stewing in the how can they do this to me energy, right, and feeling so upset, I might be better resourced to be able to say, listen, I'm not going to be able to accommodate that today. You need to check with me before you add that to my schedule. I know that there's lots of situations where that may or may not work, but what I'm trying to point out is that when we are not stuck in this terrible, negative, emotional space because of these automatic negative thoughts, we have so much more agency to be able to advocate for ourselves and to take action because we won't get stuck. So I hope that this is a really helpful framework for rethinking some of the negativity and deciding, you know what, I don't have to just decide that I'm stuck with this negative internal dialogue. I actually have some things that I can start to do that will be different, that will help keep me from getting stuck much more often, and will start to rewrite the dialogue. I am going to be working on this myself because I recognize that there are still some sticky spots that I need to work on. And like I said, I've challenged the members of my group, Unbound. We're going to do this challenge where we are saying some positive things about ourselves to ourselves on purpose every day for at least a week. We may make that the challenge for May. I'm not sure yet, but do that with us. Again, you can Google search, give me 50 affirmations. You could chat GPT that. You can pick up a book that has affirmations already in it. There are a number of things that you can do. It's important that you make them resonate with you. If you don't play basketball and you choose an affirmation, I am the greatest basketball player of all time, that's probably not going to help, my friends. Okay? So pick things that resonate with you. Pick things that you can at least have some openness to choosing to believe. Like, I'm a badass. John mentions in his book, something that he took from Kanye. Because I'm dope and I do dope, fill in the blank. There are many things that we can choose to start saying to ourselves to rewrite the narrative. My friends, that's what I have for you today. Thank you as always for listening. Please, please, please leave us a rating and a review. That really helps the podcast to be found by more people who will be helped by this work. And pass it on to a friend. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with someone else in your life. Until next week, have a great week and know that I'm thinking about you. Take care. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you as always for listening. To learn more about my coaching programs, head to www.healthierforgood.com. And if you love this podcast, please drop us a review on iTunes or support the show by clicking the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care.